Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So welcome everybody to Tuesday meditation. And now the weather is changing. It's spring coming very soon. Days are getting longer and lots more sunlight. I also had some very good news these last few weeks. For a long time I have been planning to take a trip for maybe 3 years or so. Maybe 3 years ago I had come down with some stomach problems. And my stomach problems are largely resolved. And then got good news that a monastery said that I might be able to go visit there in Sri Lanka. So it was all kind of very good news, happy news, kind of wanting to do that for a while. And also it's spring, so the days are getting kind of longer, and also I'm a big fan of hot weather. I actually don't recall complaining about hot weather for at least many years, no matter how hot it gets. And so this is kind of another nice thing, kind of, stopped by the park today and I could tell that the walking in the park season was about to begin. Kind of very, very good things. And, these kind of things come into our life, as a kind of contrast sometimes. Kind of, it's probably 3 years ago, I unexpectedly came down with stomach problems. It's kind of an occupational hazard for monks. Actually, in the canon, a lot of monks died of stomach problems. I mean, the Buddha passed away after eating food that he was not able to, that ended his life. Apparently, Sariputta also passed away after eating food that ended his life. And so it's kind of an occupational hazard for monks. Kind of a lot of monks are kind of eating various kinds of food. You don't get to choose your food. I mean, all the food people prepare is wonderful, but you can't choose like, okay, I'm a guy who likes to eat a lot of bread. Bread is good for my system. Let's eat only bread. And just go to the fridge and get it. Kind of whatever people offer you, that you eat. So because of that, sometimes you come down with stomach problems. Actually, even the founder of the Thai forest tradition, he had stomach problems for many, many years. So it's kind of something to be expected as a monk. And so kind of 3 years ago, I come down with these stomach problems, just unexpectedly. Had come back to Canada after being in California and had intended to head out on a trip to Sri Lanka, which had been my dream since I was in my early 20s. Thinking to go to Sri Lanka, that would be a really great thing to do. And when I first wanted to become a monk, I thought, Sri Lanka would be a nice place to go. And through various routes, actually never ended up going. Kind of went to Toronto and to Ottawa and to Thailand and to California, but never went to Sri Lanka. Never actually went there. And so it was just set, ready to go to Sri Lanka. On my way, had planned a brief stop in Toronto and came down with stomach problems. Just could not leave Toronto. Kind of, originally those stomach problems were actually, quite bad. I was, was able to eat. It was actually easier to talk about what I could eat than what I couldn't. It's kind of, if you have a stomach problem, that's, okay, you go, I can't eat, pickles and, whatever, 2-3 things. But at that time, it was like, okay, I can eat these 8 things. All the rest of the things I can't eat. And, when you come down with these kind of illnesses, many people come down with these various illnesses in their life, then, people will tell you many different things about having a physical illness. You can think many different things about having a physical illness. Kind of, some people will tell you, yeah, don't worry, your illness will get better. And a number of people will tell you, your illness will never get better. People actually say that to you, yeah, you'll have this for the rest of your life. And this is where it's important for us to, you never know. Stomach problems go up and down. As a monk, they can come back, they can go. But this is actually where it's important in our practice, our Buddhist practice, to have an idea about what the Buddha calls the kind of truth of or not the Buddha, but what can be described as a kind of truth of the will. So in other words, there's objective truths in the world. So this is a phone, these are cushions, that's an objective truth. Okay? It's hard to deny. If somebody here says this isn't a cushion, I can say, okay, well, let's ask 6 or 7 other people in the room. They can all see the cushion. They can feel it. They know that the word for this is cushion. Is this cushion? Yes. Okay, it's a cushion. It's called different things in different languages, but, it's an objective truth. This cushion is here. These are the truths that we learn about when we're in school, when we go to science class, when we're growing up and we're taught about the nature of the world, the way the world works. We're taught to approach the world from an attitude of skepticism. So there's a reason for this. It was a backlash in what they called the European Enlightenment. It's kind of this, in the Middle Ages in Europe, Christianity had become very dominant. Basically, had a chokehold on most intellectual thought. They even had inquisitions in Spain, where if you didn't believe correctly, then you could be tortured. And so at a certain point, people got kind of tired of this. And it was kind of there was a kind of a counterculture that arose where people became what they call like natural scientists. They were usually really rich people, and they had independent fortunes, and they would go and collect fossils and this kind of thing, and they formed societies. These kind of societies were the kind of the beginnings, what we now call science, is my understanding anyway. Anyways, these things came along, and eventually it became this idea like reason, should be at the forefront. Actually, interestingly enough, panya, or reason, is the highest quality in Buddhist practice as well. But this kind of reason, along with it came this idea of skepticism. Look, we've been told to believe all these things for so long, and now we're finding evidence that what we've been told for centuries, people have been tortured for this. This is false. Kind of produced this kind of sense of being lied to, being lied to. So, with that kind of sense came this attitude that unless somebody can prove something to me, then I won't believe it. This is one of the cornerstones of scientific thinking. You don't just go believing things. There has to be a kind of proof. Various ways that people try to prove things in science, but there has to be a proof. In other words, unless you show me that this is true, I won't believe it. And there is a kind of good reason for that. Science has produced wonderful things. Because of this kind of attitude of skepticism, science has discovered immense amounts of knowledge, has gained immense amounts of knowledge about what we might call the physical world, phenomenal world, things we never knew, 300 or 400 years ago, couldn't have imagined knowing. It's now kind of commonplace. You kind of look it up on the internet and know about it very easily. This came from this attitude of skepticism. In other words, if you don't show me, I won't believe you. Prove it. So this attitude is good. It has a place. It has a place in discovering things about the physical world. It has a place in proportion. If somebody tells us something, we don't just jump on the bandwagon and believe it willy-nilly, because people tell us all kinds of things. There's really good, swampland in Florida, and it's going to go up, it's going to quadruple in value. You should buy it now while there's still swampland left. There's not going to be any swampland. And so, if you just believe that, you'll pretty quickly have no money. This is a kind of healthy skepticism. But this kind of attitude has a time and place to it, because this attitude of skepticism can become a stumbling block in our practice when it's applied to ourselves. In other words, this attitude of skepticism becomes ingrained. You get taught it when we're young, at least growing up here in the West, growing up in most countries now where science is part of the regular curriculum. You get taught, look, don't just believe anything people tell you. course, we believe what the scientists tell us, but don't believe anything people tell you. You have to prove it. And so when this kind of attitude comes into our practice, it can have good effects, but it can also have negative effects. In other words, we don't learn to see the small potentials for things in our practice if we just want somebody to prove it to us, right? And so sometimes as a monk, you'll have people kind of saying that, it's kind of, people will come to meditate and they'll be like, well, I didn't get into the fourth jhana. It's kind of, well, you can't, right away, kind of, well, I don't believe you. It's like, well, okay, I'm not selling you. I can't prove it to you. This is not something I can prove to you. A monk can tell you, this is what's possible. A Buddha can tell you this is what's possible, but they can't prove it. This is one of the interesting things about the Dhamma. It's not an objective truth. The Dhamma is something that's a subjective truth. In other words, it's true, but it's something that we know. It's not something we can show to other people. We can't whip out, our progress in meditation and be like, here it is, meditation 6.5, here it is, out of 10, this is a 6.5. This is, the level, anybody can see it, here it is on my meditation o-meter, just check it out. It's something that we have to know. Actually, there was a kind of a very a teacher I personally respect in Thailand, and he, in the canon, a lot of the things that we read in the canon, the Buddha was an extremely skilled teacher. Actually, his ability to divide things up and make it seem simple was phenomenal. To the point where you just can't, it's hard to imagine how he did it. He makes this thing that's very complicated, very nuanced, seem simple. The point where actually, later schools of Buddhism thought that, the Buddhist teachings were something that were really elementary. And they had to make it more complicated. Actually, his teaching was very kind of sophisticated, but he puts them in a simple way. And this kind of thing is interesting because, his teaching about this, he'll say like, okay, there's the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana. There's these kind of things you can do with insight. There's these kind of ways to practice meditation. It's very brief. But what he said was, the interesting thing about meditation is there's really no signposts, It's not like, when I go coming from Pickering to Toronto, there's a sign and it says, you're now entering Toronto, population, almost 3 million. When you leave Toronto and go to Mississauga, there's a sign. When you leave Mississauga, there's a sign. You go to Brampton, there's a sign. You know where you are. But actually, imagine you take these kind of signs out from all these conurbations, all these cities in the area around Toronto. How do you know? When you've passed one city to the next, they just run into each other. There's a valley between Pickering and Toronto. You can kind of tell, if you get to know the lay of the land, you go, okay, there's probably another city here. Even though there's buildings everywhere else except the valley's a good marker. There might be a city if you pass it enough times. But if you don't, you're just going through, there's no sign, there's just more buildings, how do you know? And this is the way that our practice of the Dhamma tends to unfold as well. It's not like, although there's markers in the text, in our own practice there actually isn't these markers. It's not like a mark that says, okay, I'm at this level, I just have this much further to go. It's not like there's a mark that says, okay, I've been meditating, I feel a sense of peace, but if I just keep going in 3 weeks, I'm guaranteed to have this incredible experience I've never had before. There's nothing like that. It's like going through a city, you see some buildings, you see a sign. Imagine you're looking for downtown, you see a sign, okay, there's not really a sign there, but you just get a sense, okay, I'm going into more city here. Maybe this is the right way to go, If I want to go to the heart of the city, I keep hearing about all these big buildings, then this seems okay. There's a forest here, is that right? Should I go into the forest? Should I keep going with the buildings? What's the quickest way? Kind of don't necessarily know. It's not necessarily something that we can have a complete map of where we are. It's kind of traveling, So this is where it's important in our practice of meditation, in our practice of the Dhamma, to have this kind of sense of what they call a kind of truth of the will. In other words, the truths of the Dhamma, the truths of the Buddhist teachings, are not something that just jump out to us, right? It's not something that you can make a gadget for, although, you know, I've heard they've tried to make these various meditation gadgets. I'm kind of a little suspicious about those gadgets, about their effectiveness, but, you know, they're trying. But it's not like, say, a cell phone where you can say, okay, look, I can, you know, make a video call to my friend. Somebody says, I don't believe you. Here it is. You know, there's their face. You can talk to them. You know, it doesn't work that way. You know? It's more like this kind of sense where you're traveling through, you want to get to a destination. You know, you want to say, go downtown. That's where you want to go. It's a place, you've heard about it, you've never seen it. Other people have told you it's there. And you don't necessarily even know where you are on the map. So at first, you just get yourself oriented. Where am I? Am I north? Am I south? Am I east? Am I west? You know, where am I? You know, I think I've heard that downtown is south. You know, at least I know that much. You know, there's a map. I've seen a map of Ontario. I don't know where I am on it. You know? And so this is the same way getting our bearings, knowing about our wholesome and unwholesome qualities. You know, what qualities do I have? It's kind of like weighing this kind of scale, you know. What are my good qualities? What are my bad qualities? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? We learn to take a measure of our own character. That's kind of the Buddha says, you know, even if you can't read anybody else's mind, you know, make sure you can read your own mind. Kind of learn to take this measure of our own mind. We kind of have this sense, we start out this way, what are my good qualities and my bad qualities? And from there it becomes a little bit more obvious, you know, which direction to go in. When we know which way is north, south, east, west, that's when we can say, okay, downtown is, say, south. I know I'm kind of south, or I kind of know roughly where I am on the map. Let's strike out in this direction. So in other words, when we know what good and bad qualities we have, then we try to eliminate those bad qualities that are right here. In other words, it doesn't have to be anything like, how come I'm not getting, you know, where are these states of bliss? Where's these amazing things I read about in the text? It can be, what are my bad qualities right now? How do I reduce them? How do I make those less? You know? What are my good qualities? How do I increase them? How do I make those more? And this is like somebody who starts setting out. And they have a rough idea of where they are, and they set out in a general direction of where they think they're going. You know? Now, the interesting thing about these kind of practices is that it's not a guarantee that it's going to be a straight line to downtown. As anybody knows who drives, sometimes crazy things happen on the road, and you can't take even the route that, actually Google Maps is getting pretty good now, but you know, you can't necessarily take the route that you plot out on the map. Okay, I know downtown is here, I've got a rough idea, you start heading out, and all of a sudden the road is closed. That particular avenue is closed, even though the map tells you where to go. So then what is to be done in that kind of situation? Now, this is where we have to have this kind of quality, what's called in the text is patipanna. What this basically means is this sense of ingenuity. In other words, we have a desire to get somewhere, we face an obstacle, there's no map for how to overcome it, how do we get past it? How do we get over it? It's kind of, you know, there's a bunch of little kids here doing dancing and things. And when you watch little kids, you know, they play with these blocks and something doesn't work. They just keep trying these different ways to fit things together. Sometimes they come up with like crazy, you know, ways of fitting blocks, you know, building things. But that's how they learn, you know, which ways things fit. That's how they learn to problem solve at an elementary level through play. And in the same way, when we come up against a kind of obstacle in our practice, say, I've got this plan, you know, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. It's all laid out in our life. You know, our whole life is laid out. The plan is set. Everything's ready to go. You know, and there's this obstacle. Just cannot complete this plan. Okay? So when this kind of obstacle happens, this is when we have to take this kind of refuge in the Buddhist teachings. Although people tell us, look, this is something that's impossible to overcome. We have this kind of idea in our head, look, why is this impossible to overcome? So I'm not going to believe this is impossible to overcome. And this is where this aspect in our practice of having this kind of sense of a truth of the will comes into play. In other words, we know we're to head in, or we think we're to head in a particular direction, don't know for sure, we haven't got there. We come up against an obstacle, then we have this sense, look, there's an obstacle here. I've either got the choice to sit right here and not go anywhere, to turn back and go in the direction I was, or to start groping around to try to find a solution, try to find a way out, try to find a way past. And this is the interesting thing about traveling. Actually, I was reading this book about surviving in the wilderness. And what the guy said in there was really interesting. So usually when you want to know a distance to something, you say, how far is it, say, to get to downtown? And somebody would tell, okay, it's, 50 kilometers or whatever, I'm just guessing, to go to downtown. And that's one way. But he said, don't ask people in the wilderness how many kilometers it is. Ask them how many days it takes. Because you could be going along. It might be 50 kilometers, but you have to go all the way down this gorge, all the way through a stream. You have to climb up some crazy cliff. You have to go left. You have to go up. And that kind of, that small section, a path, it's this tiny section that's less than a kilometer, can take a day to traverse, to get past this kind of obstacle. So this is the kind of attitude that we're encouraged by our teachers to develop. Look, there's going to be these obstacles that arise in our path of practice, trying to move forward in developing wholesome qualities, eliminating unwholesome ones, and gaining happiness. And when they arise, we don't know how long they're going to last. It's kind of the tricky thing about these obstacles. They seem like they'll just last forever. There's people who will have us believe that whatever obstacle we face will last forever. Actually, sometimes they may be true. You have terminal cancer. That is an obstacle that you will not be able to, physically overcome. But many of the obstacles that we face are not terminal cancer. Actually, there's even many people who overcome terminal cancer. And so this is why we have this kind of attitude. We don't often talk about it in the West, but this attitude, what we call like a warrior's attitude. In other words, wherever there's a solution, wherever there's a kind of shaft of light, we'll crack it open. We'll make it bigger. We're stuck in a dark room. We want to escape. Wherever we see a little bit of light, we go to it and we try to break it open. Try to find how to get out. It's not always the case that the shaft of light is the way out. The way out might be the door and it's in darkness. But no matter what, we keep going. And the interesting thing about this kind of practice, when we have this attitude, okay, there's a way out of this. This is not a kind of finale. People may tell me it's a finale, but I'm not going to believe them. Instead, I'm going to believe there's a way out. That's the first thing. We start to believe there's a way out, then we start to search for a way out. We start groping around. And when we grope around, even though it's very dark, we don't see anything, we start to get a sense of what the room is like, what it feels like, the contours of the room. Sometimes we're groping around, we hit something sharp, might bleed a little bit. Okay, let's not go there again. So we turn around, go in the other direction, you grope around, sometimes we hit something smooth, we try to jiggle it or whatever. Okay, it's not moving, grope around some more. And slowly over time, we get this sense of what the whole room is like. This is why it takes so long to become a Buddha, by the way. Okay, you want to become a Buddha, you have to find the way to escape samsara on your own. You have to do a lot of groping around. You have to basically find everything out on your own. Basically have to find all the contours of the room. Now, we don't have to do that, but it's inevitable that these kind of things will arise in our life, arise in our practice. And through this groping around, through going through searching for things, eventually we find something that feels a little bit flat. Playing with it, we hit it, and it turns out to be a light switch. And suddenly the whole room is illuminated. And this is what it's like in our practice. Sometimes it's very slow like this. Sometimes there's these kind of obstacles. But then suddenly and unexpectedly, they just kind of break. Just break apart sometimes and fall away. Actually, we don't know that until they're gone. But actually, genuine insights in the Buddha's teachings arise like this. They sometimes arise after periods of great difficulty, periods of great kind of hardship in our practice, periods of great kind of endurance, where we spent all this time groping around. We spent all this time trying to crack the shafts of light. We've spent all this time trying to jiggle the door, only to find that that's not the right knob. And then suddenly, unexpectedly, we find a light switch. And when we find this kind of light switch, it doesn't matter how long this room has been dark. That's what this I started in this kind of Zen tradition. They would often say that about the practicing Buddhism. It's kind of, even if a room has been dark for 1,000 years, once you find the light, it's light. And you can see all around, kind of unexpectedly. But this is a kind of thing that people experience only through perseverance. Only through this attitude, look, there's these truths that are objective. Yes, there's objective truths in my life. There are things. This is a cushion. That's a wall. But there's also what they call these truths of the will. There's also what they call these truths that only become true if I believe that I can make them true. There's problems that I can only solve if I believe that I can solve them, and then take the steps to solve them. If I believe I can't solve them, that also becomes true. There's a truth of the will. I have this kind of will, I'm skeptical, I won't be able to solve it, I'll believe these people. That will become a truth for us. We have this attitude, this is a problem I can overcome, and we don't give up overcoming it. That can also become a truth. So our default position, our default attitude as practitioners of the Buddha's teachings, practitioners of meditation, is that everything is a truth of the will. Basically, whatever problem we come up against, we assume there's a solution for it. Basically, any problem. Basically problems in our Dhamma practice. We have kind of terminal cancer, okay, do what we can, try to beat that. If it goes away, good. But any problem in our Dhamma practice, we assume there's a solution for this. There's a way out of this. There's a way to get beyond this. And through practicing in this way, this is where we learn about the principles that go in to the teachings of the Buddha. This is where we learn for ourselves how truly skilled he is. Although he lays it out in such clear language, it's actually more of a continuum. The way that these things work, more of it's not like a discrete X, Y, Z all the time. There are things that are discrete in the Buddha's teaching, but most of our practice is more like traveling through the city of Toronto without any road signs and learning about where the streets are on our own. Sometimes making a wrong turn, sometimes making a right turn, but eventually through this kind of practice, we develop a sense of a map in our own head. And then the day comes and we gain a kind of success in our practice. Not just like a success overcoming illness, but successes in our practice of meditation. And these things are better than anything that we could hope for in worldly life. There's nothing better than the practice of the Dhamma. There's nothing higher than the Buddha's teachings. There's no happiness like the happiness that can be gained from the practice of meditation, from the elimination of defilements. These are the best things we can do. These are the best things we can have. This is the best thing we can do with our life. But this is a knowledge that we gain for ourselves through these kind of tribulations sometimes. It's not like every time we want to go and attain Nibbana, it's a straight shot down the road. Sometimes there's a roadblock. Sometimes there's no signs. But it's through overcoming these obstacles that we learn what the Buddha taught about ourselves. And when we practice this way, the day can come for us. It's come for teachers in the past. It's come for lay people in the past. It's come for monks in the past. When we know for ourselves what the Buddha taught. When we become independent of other people in his teachings. And this is something that for the people who gain it, for the monks who gain it, if you listen to them, even if they were offered kingship over the entire world, in exchange, they wouldn't take it. And this is true. So this is something that we can reflect on. There's these truths of the will. There's these opportunities in the Dhamma, and they're opportunities that we can make real. We can make happen for ourselves, so long as we believe they're possible, and so long as we don't give up in our quest to achieve them.